Welcome to Fresh Catholic, a podcast for those who are converting, reverting, or simply want a fresh perspective of the Catholic faith to help them to open their hearts and minds to become closer to the love and goodness of Christ. My daily prayer is that I will be a bright light to others, to be filled with the love and light of Christ, so that when people look at me, they see Him radiating out from me for His glory. Hello and welcome. I'm Lori Balderas, and I'm so happy you're here. Well, once again, I have another amazing guest. I am just being blessed by the multitudes these days. So this week's guest is author and historian, Dr. Cheryl Hughes, who holds a PhD in historical theology from Durham University in England, my mother's homeland. And her books include Catherine Drexel, The Riches to Rags Story of an American Catholic Saint, which sounds amazing and fascinating, and also Crossing Boundaries and Confounding Identity, Chinese Women in Literature, Art, and Film. And now she has a book, Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, Convert Maker. Oh my goodness, I want to read all those books. She and her husband live in Tulsa, Oklahoma, another Oklahoma guest. I won't sing this week. I won't sing Oklahoma, but you know where my heart is after we just watched that movie. So now I am so pleased and honored to welcome my guest, Dr. Hughes. Hello, Dr. Hughes. How are you today?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm just thrilled to be with you and your audience.
I know, I'm so excited to have you. I was when we did our pre-interview, I was telling you that I get a list of authors and books sent to me to see who I would like to have on as a guest, and your book jumped out at me because I am a recent, very excited fan of Fulton Sheen. I want to call him by the name Archbishop Fulton Sheen. I'm so sorry, I don't want to be disrespectful. But I was telling you that I was not really aware of him. And I know that probably sounds funny to people, but I'm a convert and a lot of things are very new to me. And so I came upon him as on YouTube and I watched every video I could get my hands on. And then that was it. And I thought, that's it? I don't have any more. And I was just so magnetized to him. So I'm very, very interested in your book because if other people aren't aware of him, which I'm sure most people are, he just, I think, obviously has changed many people's lives. And he obviously you were drawn to him. So I'm just really curious to know, like, I have a bunch of questions for you, and I'm so excited. I was going to jump right in, but I want to ask you first for my listeners, can you give us a little background on yourself and how you were raised and how you came to where you are today?
Sure. Well, I'm not from Oklahoma originally, though I do know the words to the song. My father was in the Air Force, and so we moved a good bit, but I was mainly in California until I got married. And then we were on the East Coast in Boston, and now we're back in the middle of the country. My husband and I are both converts, and he converted the Easter after we got married, the first year. And his mother asked me if I would not convert because she didn't want their South Carolina relatives thinking that I had forced it on him. So I waited a year just for peace of the family, and so I've been a member of the church since I was 22. So quite a long time now, but you know, and I'm still learning things, even with a PhD in theology. I'm still learning things about the church, and it's a lifelong study.
It is.
To be Catholic.
I say that often on my podcast that I think there's so much to learn, and I don't know that we'll ever know everything, but because it is a lifestyle. It's not just, you don't turn off and on, being Catholic. Right. And I feel like I'm constantly learning. And even if I think I know something, I'll learn more. It's kind of just an ongoing lesson, and I embrace it all because you know, I just think it's a beautiful faith.
You have to. It's sort of all or yes. No, that's a great story for you. I'm very happy. Yeah, I was delighted. I think some of the things I miss that I'm not grounded in are some of the cultural Catholic things that people do. I mean, it took me a long time to learn all the different prayers. I will say I think I am a much better Catholic in the last 20 years than I was in the first 30 years. So I think just because I've been studying it more and living it more, and we're going to a cathedral parish here in Tulsa that's quite diverse. It's got people from all over the city. Some of them go by 2 or 3 Catholic churches before they get to the cathedral, and they just love being there. And the liturgies there are really spectacular, and the music is spectacular. And we are growing at the rate of 5 to 7 families a week.
Wow.
Which is a lot.
That's
which
very
is really
encouraging.
A lot. Yeah. Oh, yeah. We have 94 people coming in at Easter time into the church.
Wow, that's amazing. That's beautiful. I feel like we
It
have
is.
a lot more this year than normal, than typical, and I think that's wonderful. I mean, let's expand the
Oh,
kingdom.
right, right. And they have many large families, and they're those babies are the future of the church.
That's right.
So
That's
it's
right. That's
so I think we
wonderful.
really have been very lucky.
Okay, so where did you get the idea for this book? Like what prompted you to want to write this particular book about Archbishop Fulton Sheen?
Well, I actually came into it, or I should say I backed into it. I liked doing work on women, as you can see from Catherine Drexel. When I was in grad school, almost all my papers I would center on some woman or another. And so I was going to do a biography of Claire Booth Luce, if you know who she is. She was a congresswoman, a writer. She was married to Henry Luce, who owned Time Inc.
Oh,
And so they were the power couple in the 70s, through from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. But lo and behold, as I was researching her, I found that she was brought into the church by Fulton Sheen. So I thought, aha, that sounds really interesting. And then somebody just came out with at that time, a 2-volume work on Claire Booth Luce, which is probably more anybody ever needs to know about her, even though she's a really fascinating character. So I started looking into Fulton Sheen and found out that he was indeed the convert maker. Some people say he's probably the best evangelist, since St. Peter.
wow.
So it is quite amazing. And so then I looked for other people who had converted. And I think I mentioned this to you. I had a whole yellow sheet from a legal pad of people that he had converted. And so I looked into each one by one, if they had written an autobiography, and also what biographies there were out there. And so I was able to find 8 really outstanding and interesting characters who had also written autobiographies. I like for people to be able to speak in their own words, if possible.
Oh, yeah,
And
that makes sense.
So that's how I got into Bishop Sheen. The book, just for your audience, is chronological, but there are points in there where he gets to know these individuals whom he brings into the church, and so those are inserted in there at the proper chronological time.
Well, and I know you had said, like you're saying, you had a list of people and you put some in this book, but I'm thinking you have room for another book because you have other people you could add in later.
Well, it's possible. It's possible. I was sort of tickled by some of the people in Hollywood have become Catholic. and I thought about doing a book on Hollywood converts.
I think that would be great.
I may do that.
Well, and I think,
since I think,
especially in Hollywood, to be, a Christian, to be a Catholic, certainly, and to be practicing and proud, I think is, it's rare. It's like, Simon and I, we were in the movie business, and it was, everybody knew we were Catholic. We had a crucifix in our studio up on the, I would catch people like staring at it, like, because,
what's that?
and I wear a crucifix every day, but I mean, you know, it was a weird dynamic because they knew we were Catholic, and it's like, I'm always very impressed when somebody has that that they're able to be proud about it. So even that these people, like you're saying, they wrote autobiographies and they gave him that credit, or gave, where it's like, I think that's amazing, because what that does is it draws people to wonder, it's like, oh, like, Mark Wahlberg, Mel Gibson, tell me more about that. Like, why are you Catholic, and I mean, obviously, I think they were raised Catholic, but I'm I'm always amazed at people who convert, because, that was my story, and I never thought that wasn't even on my radar to become Catholic, and yet God had a bigger plan, and it started way before I even knew that was the plan or the road I was on. But I think those stories, that's the reason I started this podcast, was to talk to converts and, try to get people to revert back and everything. So, it's like I'm just very fascinated by that. I think Fulton Sheen's, my impression of him is he draws people in because he's very, very smart. You can tell he's very smart, intelligent, very theologically sound. And also he's kind of got this, he's funny. Like the stories and his mannerisms. He's kind of like he's converting people in a stand-up sort of way. Like the way he would do it was like he would draw in the crowd, and like he would make them laugh, but then he would say these very profound things, very thought-provoking things. And I think there's certain people that is definitely their gift, and he ranks way up there on that for sure.
Oh, absolutely. I would really call him a Lenten Catholic. We're in Lent right now. And let me tell you why. He had a delicate stomach. At some point, he had to go to the Mayo Clinic, and they operated on his intestines and stomach. So he had a delicate stomach after that. So he never ate anything. So if in Lent, we are supposed to be fasting, and he essentially was fasting all the time, his whole life. He really just didn't. There was a point where he mainly ate pears and ground beef, canned pears and ground beef. He obviously was a very holy man. He's best known, I think, in circles for his holy hour. He kept a holy hour every day when he started that, which was I think maybe the first year he was in as a seminarian. So he also was very, very familiar with Mary, and there's some good stories on that later. So he was very close to Jesus and to Mary. He had been dedicated to the Virgin Mary by his mother when he was 4 days old. They took him to be baptized, and when that was done, she then took him over to the Marian altar and laid him on the altar and gave him to her, gave him to the Holy Mother. So that was something he was really aware of. I think in lots of ways things like that happen, and it just drops off the face of the earth. People forget about it. But he never forgot about it. He rededicated himself to her at his confirmation, and then at his ordination, he dedicated himself to the Virgin Mary. So he was very, very holy, deep in prayer. His prayer life was just profound, I think. He was also, so we've got fasting, we've got prayer. Lastly, we have penance. And he does lots of things that I would put in the penance category. Also, actually, I have to say later, he wore a hair shirt. I mean, that's pretty serious penance.
What is that?
In modern America?
I don't know what that is.
A hair shirt. It's the cloth is woven with like horsetail hairs.
Oh.
So it's scratchy and it's uncomfortable. And it's something that, you read about it a lot in medieval times, but you don't hear about it too much here. But there was a man who was interviewed for Sheen's Positio. The Positio is the document that is provided to the Vatican for them to look at to see if he is worthy of even starting a cause for his canonization. So he was very popular, as you say. He made lots and lots of money, personally made lots and lots of money. He personally raised millions of dollars, and he gave everything away. I mean, I think that's very penitential. He gave away the coat off his back twice, 2 different times.
Wow.
He saw a priest who didn't have a coat on, and he said, "Here, take mine." And it turned out to be this gorgeous camel hair coat. He said, "I have another." Well, turns out he didn't, so he had to go buy another one. But he was aware of his vanity. He was very vain. You saw him on television. You saw how good-looking he is.
Mm-hmm.
You may be surprised to know that he's only 5'7".
Oh.
Oh, right. That's everybody's reaction to that he was 5'7", which is, in his day wasn't as short for a man as it would be today, but it's still not imposing. But he is an imposing figure, and how do they do that? Partially on television, they have him wear, he wears his full regalia, complete with the cape over his shoulders. Well, that makes him look bigger, takes up more space because he's got this big cape he's swirling around as he moves around the stage. And the cassock has got those buttons up the front. And so that develops a horizontal line that makes him look up. And on television, you could cant the cameras. And so the cameras were looking up a little bit to him.
Yeah, he looks very long and lean.
Yeah, he looks long and lean. Well, he is lean. He's just not very long. So that's the beauty of the medium. The television was just made for him. He said, "I was born in the electronic age." And I think he would have said he was born for the electronic age, because he really, really made good use of the radio before and the television after. And then the written word. He wrote like 60 books, but had over 100 different publications because he put out all kinds of pamphlets and just short, brief things.
I have a book that we have in our chapel at our church. We have books that people donate, and you can take them if you'd like and then return them if you'd like. And I grabbed one of his books. I haven't read it yet, but it's very thick. But I did grab that because it was after I watched the videos, and I was like, oh my gosh, I have to get a book of his. So one of these days I'll read that too. What will the readers of this book find surprising about him that, that they didn't know? Because it sounds like people know certain things about him, and he was very well known for certain things. But what would the readers find surprising in this book you wrote?
We'll be right back. What does it mean to live a life of faith? What does it mean to live as a Catholic Christian? Hi, this is Bishop Kevin Sweeney, host of the podcast Beyond the Beacon. Join me as we unravel and discuss the mysteries of our faith, of the church, of living as Catholic Christians. Be inspired by engaging interviews with priests and seminarians, deacons, religious, women and men who live the life of faith day by day here in our Diocese of Patterson. in food pantries and classrooms, in parishes and ministry. How is God working in their lives today? How is God working in our lives? Join me as I ask them and be part of the conversation on Beyond the Beacon. Listen and follow Beyond the Beacon wherever you get your podcasts, or watch it on my YouTube channel. Please check the show notes for more details. Thank you and God bless you.
Well, beyond the hair shirt and how short he was, I mean, that's just surprising. Everybody I tell that to, or audiences when I'm talking to them, they all just are blown away because they thought he was so big. But that's because he has a large personality.
Yes.
And I think what readers will find is that they get enveloped into him as they read about him. He's so incredibly kind. He's just an amazingly kind person. In fact, he said that the three things that you need to bring people into the church are kindness, and kindness. So, he never argues people into the church. I will say he does have some unique ways of getting people into the church. An early morning, rainy Sunday morning, he opened the front door of the church where he was on a break from his graduate studies. He was in London. And he, the young priest, so he's the one who has to get up and open the door in the morning and have the early mass and what have you. And so he went to open the door, and there was this very disheveled, obviously inebriated young woman. And she's freezing because it's probably Christmas time. He's on his Christmas break. And so he said, won't you come in and let me give you a nice hot cup of tea to warm you up? And she said, oh, yeah, I'd like that. So she goes in and she warms up and they have a chat. It's very pleasant. And he said, why don't you go home, take a shower, get into bed, have a nap, and come back later this afternoon and we can really talk. Because I think I may have something for you. So she did, and she came back, and she said, before she left in the morning, she said, I'll come back and I'll talk to you, but don't ask me to go to confession. I'm not going to do that. Just don't ask me to go to confession. He said, okay, I will not ask you to go to confession. So he leads her into the church. She's obviously is much more presentable now than she had been 6 or 7 hours previous. So they're walking down the aisle, and he comes kind of parallel to a confessional, and he bumps her in. Bumps her in, and she falls to her knees in the confessional. He goes around and gets at the priest's side, hears her confession, and she came out and she says, thank you for that. I never would have done that on my own. And it turns out she was having man problems. In fact, she was having 3 man problems. She had 3 men who were trying to tell her what to do, when to do it, how to do it. And they wanted to rule her life, and she didn't want that. And so with her renewed faith, obviously she had been a Catholic, so she has now kind of come back into the church, because that's, for people who've been away for a long time, many of them don't realize that's all they have to do to come back into the good graces of the church is go to confession.
That's right.
So she's back in the fold, and there was a billboard across from the church, and it showed an advertisement for a play that was on, and her face is on it. So she's this famous star in theater of her day there in London. And she called him a couple of years later and said, I'm leaving the theater, I'm leaving acting, I'm going into the convent.
This the same woman? The one that was
the same
drunk?
woman?
Oh.
The same woman. I mean, this is a long story, but it's the same woman. It's just amazing.
Oh, my goodness.
And after she went through her postulancy and novice years, he was the one who pinned her veil on for her.
Oh, that's so, I just got chills. That's so nice.
Yeah, it's a very sweet. It's a very sweet
I love
story.
that story.
But it's how he how did he know that you could bump this lady into the confessional? And he knew it. I mean, he had an intuition about people that was just uncanny.
That's amazing. And on that, hold that thought. We have to go to a break. I'm like, I was so fascinated by your story that I'm like, I know Simon's going, tick-tock, Lori, tick-tock. Anyway, hold that thought. We'll be right back. Have you ever wanted to witness the miraculous and walk where saints have walked? This is your chance. Join me, Lori Balderas, host of Fresh Catholic Podcast, and Father Matthew Miguel, as we walk with you through Italy's most sacred sites. From the Eucharistic miracles of Lanciano and Orvieto to the peace of Assisi, your heart will be transformed by these extraordinary moments of grace. You'll walk the hallowed streets of Rome, step into the history of the Vatican, and witness the places where faith has flourished for centuries. Each stop deepens your journey. Each miracle renews your soul. We invite you to join us on an unforgettable, life-changing experience.
Join us and let your faith come alive in Italy.
And we're back. All right, well, I love that story. That was great. I'm sure there's like lots, that's one reason I love him. And like you say, how would he know that he could bump her in there? But obviously it was the Holy Spirit and it worked. So
Yes.
Yes. I also feel he's very theatrical, like the way he talks, his tone, it's very, it makes you lean in and want to hear what he has to say. That's what
Right.
I believe about him. And I do think that attitude of, how she said, I don't want to go to confession. You're not going to talk me into that. That's almost exactly what happened to me when years and years ago when I was married before and my husband his family was very Christian. And I said, I do not want to be Christian. You will not make me Christian. And then I became Christian. And then he left and I ended up becoming Catholic, in this life.
Oh, good. You're right where you should be.
Yeah, but I just think that, and the person that drew me into being Christian, it was a similar thing. It was just the way he was. It was, I was drawn into it because, I believe, like, if you imagine Jesus and how he acted and reacted from what we know, obviously, he had that way about him where he just, you wanted more of him. At least I do. I can never get enough of him. And, he draws you in with, it's like magnetic, like I say. And so that's the impression I get from, Fulton Sheen. Was there anything that you learned specifically while you were doing research besides what you've already talked about? Was there anything in addition where you said, oh gosh, I've never heard that before, or, that really stood out? The things you've already said are very fascinating, but is there anything else before we move on?
We'll be right back.
If you're a Catholic entrepreneur, you need to check out Catholic Founders, the #1 podcast for Catholic entrepreneurs and business owners. Each week on Catholic Founders, we share stories and lessons of how to apply the teachings of the Catholic Church into the businesses that you run. From mom-and-pop small businesses to venture-backed startups, we cover a lot. If you're just getting started, we recommend checking out episode #1, where Alessandro De Santo, the co-founder of Hallow, gives us a masterclass on how to pray as a Catholic entrepreneur. Follow Catholic Founders wherever you get your podcasts.
And I'd actually say that he, as this magnetic personality, people are drawn to him, but he's drawn to people. He loves people. And I think that is something that it's a radical love that he has for all of God's people. And we know he was instrumental in these famous people that I've written about in the book. But he's also, a priest who called out to and brought in all kinds of people into the church. I mean, when he was traveling, he got himself a cannibal to come into the church. I mean, he's just really, I did not know much about him when I started into him. I'm old, but not that old. And so it wasn't somebody I grew up with, though it was a name that I've always known. And in fact, in 2000, just as the Y2K was swinging in, there was a poll of who are the most famous Catholics. And I want to say you had John Paul II, Mother Teresa, Padre Pio, and Fulton Sheen. And this is 30 years after he's gone.
Wow.
So he still had that name recognition. You said you thought he was theatrical. He did not take acting lessons. His voice is his own. I think the voice is very peculiar, and that's just a gift of God, that kind of voice and accent. I think partially it's from knowing so many foreign languages, because he could operate in several foreign languages. And so I think, all that got together and developed what was his voice. And he said he did take voice lessons when he was a young priest writing his first book, that they weren't singing lessons, but they were for talking. And so she told him to talk with lungs full of air all the way down to the diaphragm. Just fill yourself up as much as possible. And then he had a debate coach in college who told him, be natural. And so those two things, the voice that's coming from below, not up here, like in the throat, if you talk to people who are nervous about talking and they can just barely talk because everything gets all tight. That and being natural, I think, gives you Fulton Sheen. But when he was living, he went to graduate school in Belgium. That's where he got his PhD from Louvain University there. And his brother was also there studying psychiatry. And they were both in school, and so there were breaks. And one break, they had never seen an opera. Before the end of the summer, they had seen 28 operas.
Oh, wow.
So I do think in lots of ways, he knew about those gestures that make it seem so dramatic. He'd hold on to this, he'd stand like this, or he'd put his arms up over his head. He'd come in close to the camera and back away. It's just, there are all kinds of things that I think he learned subconsciously, because I don't think he was aware, from looking at opera. Because in opera, they have these exaggerated gestures.
Right.
So, at any rate.
Interesting. The other thing about him, when I first saw those videos on YouTube, I just saw, the thumbnail for it. I was thinking, oh, that's from a long time ago. It probably will be, who knows what it will be. It's probably, very antiquated or whatever. And when I started listening, it's very current. You and I were talking about this in our pre-interview, where the things he was talking about in these videos, which were a long time ago, he could have been talking about those today. There are things that are happening today, or things that we can do in order to manage what's going on in our world today, or in our families, or in our relationships. It really hasn't changed. It's like, it's good advice. It's good things to ponder that you can just insert. Like, that he could be in a modern look today doing it, and it would be, it's a timeless way that he is speaking, in my opinion.
Right. I know. I agree. I think his advice. We should all pay attention to Bishop Sheen.
Yes. And I also
I will.
do you also feel that he was I like priests that are firm, in their beliefs and not wishy-washy and not going with, the tide to try to be popular. It's more about, to give the correct information that's in alignment with our faith. And that's one of the reasons I think I'm drawn to him, is that yes, he has, like he'll make people laugh or he says these things, but they're he's telling you the right information, I feel, and I
Right.
like
Right.
that. And I think that
Right.
makes him a really good role model for other priests.
Right. In fact, he when he was in his 70s, after he left Rochester for a while, for only 3 years was he ever the bishop of a diocese, and so when he left Rochester, he his main occupation was giving retreats to priests and to nuns and to seminarians, also to college students, and also to prisons. He also went to prisons and preached there. And he says, gentlemen, the only difference between me and you is that I haven't been caught.
Oh.
I don't think he had anything he had done that I thought that was very cute, and that sort of helped win them over. And in fact, one of the inmates, after he was paroled or had served his sentence, he called up Bishop Sheen and he said, the bishop said, "Oh, it's really good to hear from you. What are you doing? What are you looking for?" He said, "Well, I don't know." He said, "Well, what was your job in the prison?" He said, "Well, I worked in the kitchen." He said, "Well, can you cook?" And he said, "Yeah." So he hired him as his cook.
Oh, wow.
He hired him as his cook. Then at the presidential prayer breakfast, this was a sort of amazing little thing, and you may have seen it on YouTube because it's fairly famous for Sheen lore. It was Jimmy Carter and Rosalind Carter were sitting there, and other dignitaries had come to sitting at the high table, and Sheen starts out and he says, "Mr. President, you are a sinner." Pause. We are all sinners. But there was enough of a pause in there that it was incredibly dramatic. So timing is everything. Jackie Gleason, who was a big television star, who had a weekly program, I think on Sunday night. Anyway, he really thought that Sheen had great timing when he's telling a joke or telling a story. Sheen tells a story about where he was talking to somebody somewhere in the Middle West somewhere. And if you're on the East Coast or the West Coast, you don't think about too much that's going on in the Midwest. But he was there, and he was giving a talk, and somebody raised his hand, and he said, "How do you know what it was like for Jonah when he was in the whale?" And he said, and she responded, I'll ask him when I get to heaven. And so the guy followed up, said, "Well, what if he's not there?" And Sheen said, "Then you look for him." It's just quick-witted. People enjoy that kind of repartee. So he was really very good at that. When you look on YouTube, your audience ought to know that if it's in color, they are later. If it's in black and white, it's the original Life is Worth Living series, if it's in black and white. And then if it's in color, it's after 1960
Oh, interesting.
and on.
Oh, maybe there's more I
So,
can look up then, because I was telling you I looked up something else and it wasn't him talking, but it was somebody referring to what he had said, and I wanted to watch him doing it. That was the whole thing I was interested in. So yeah, we'll have to check that
yeah,
out. We're
right.
going to take another quick break, and then I have a couple
Okay.
more questions for you. So we'll be right back. Let me tell you about all things Fresh Catholic, so buckle up. We have a podcast with weekly topic episodes and Fresh Catholic Daily, the daily Mass readings, on all platforms and YouTube. Like, share, subscribe, rate, and review. That would really help. Our website, freshcatholic.com, has an online store with merchandise and coffee, a blog, comics, info about our pilgrimage to Italy in September of this Jubilee year, and Fresh Catholic courses with educator Charles Merritt, including the Hail Mary, the Our Father, Sin, Sacraments and Grace, Advent, Angels, and Virtues. We're on Instagram and Facebook at Fresh Catholic with short videos every day. Email me at lori@freshcatholic.com. I'd love to hear from you. And please consider becoming a Patreon or sponsor to help support our mission of drawing people to the faith or back to the faith. Phew! Spread the word and join the fun. Thanks so much. Bye. And we're back. Okay, so now I'm wondering, what are the biggest misconceptions about Fulton Sheen, according to you?
I think a lot of people dismissed him as a lightweight because he was on television, because he told stories, and because he joked. They just, I think many priests were envious of him, and in their envy, they talked him down as really not a serious theologian or really not a serious bishop, that he was all in it for the glamour and the glitz. And not to say he didn't enjoy the glamour and the glitz, but that's when he started wearing the hair shirt.
Oh.
So I think very early on, I think that's the biggest misconception. He's incredibly intelligent. As a student, he was awarded what's called an agrégé, and that is a European college degree above a PhD. So you have to be invited to do it. You have to write an important book, and you have to pass a test. So he did all of that, and he was given an agrégé by the Catholic University in Belgium. When the book was published, it was such an outstanding book that he won a prize for it, a prize that's only given once in a decade.
Oh, wow.
And when he got the agrégé, that happens only, he was the first American to earn that. So all of those, I think, speak highly to his intelligence, along with those 60 books.
Interesting. I think, we have some priests nowadays that I think also kind of get that rap of like, oh, they're out doing things out in the world, or they're on, social media or whatever. And I feel like they sometimes get a bad rap, but they're also doing it so that they can reach the masses. Like back in the old days, there wasn't, television or social media or all those things. And so this is how they are, able to, again, get the word out, draw some eyes on them. I don't think they do it for, the reasons everybody thinks they're doing it for. I mean, one of the reasons I was drawn to the Catholic Church is because of Bishop Robert Barron, and back before he was a bishop. And Simon bought me his Catholicism series, and it literally changed everything. And then I had the honor of, meeting him frequently. He used to come to our church all the time because he was our bishop. And so I don't look down on that, but I can see how some people would look down on that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Though he tried to be very careful to guard his reputation. At one point, I want to say, I have the people incorrectly here, but I think it was Loretta Young, who was a beautiful star in her day, and another young woman, and they wanted to meet him for dinner at the 21 Club in New York. And he said, why don't you come to my apartment for dinner? I have a chef. He'll cook dinner for us. He didn't think it would be seemly for him to be out with these Hollywood starlets, one on each arm. So he really did have to be careful with his personality, so it didn't give anybody any ammunition to go after him.
Right. Interesting. Now, one thing I know is that I have in my notes here is that he became one of the best experts on communism in the United States, which I would think is something not a lot of people maybe know. And so tell me, I mean, I'm sure that that's a whole other episode we could do, but can you tell me a little bit about that will, and do you talk
Sure.
about this in your book so that this would whet somebody's appetite to want to know more from reading your book?
Well, he read this is during the days of the Soviet Union. So he read the Soviet Constitution. He read everything that Marx and Engels had ever written, anything that was put out. He had a secretary who would read the Pravda, which was the state newspaper in Russia, and give him a kind of a synopsis of what was in there. So he really studied this to the point where when Nikita Khrushchev was visiting the United States, he was introduced to Bishop Sheen, and he said, "Oh, I know you. You know more about communism than I do." Well, Khrushchev was the premier of the Soviet Union. So, I mean, he knew, he had his ducks in a row.
Wow.
And it was an issue. It was a political issue, but it was more for him that communism was atheistic in its tenets. It was expressly against religion. They famously called it the opiate of the people. So he thought, and it was especially in the 30s and later in the 40s, people were joining the Communist Party. But he also said, on the other hand, and I think this comes into his kindness idea, is that he thought most people were drawn to communism because of its goal, its utopian goal of this classless society where everybody is the same. And of course, we didn't get to experience that because it doesn't look like it's ever going to come to fruition. You think about the millions and millions of people who've been murdered under the one communist regime or another, or Marxist. Lots of people today don't call themselves communists; they call themselves Marxists. So, he was just pointing that out as a danger and trying to protect the church from that attack, because the Communist Party thought that the Catholic Church was the institution that stood before it and global domination. They were out to destroy the church.
Wow. So that also just shows, how intelligent he was and how, multifaceted he was too. I mean,
for
that's
sure.
a big thing to take on.
Oh, yes. Actually, three of the people in my book are communists, and they were members of the Communist Party. But he always separated the ism from the individual. He thought they could be saved, and he wanted to save as many as he could.
That's beautiful. That's very Jesus-like,
Of course.
Yeah. That's great. So couple questions about this. Why has his beatification been held up, do you think?
his beatification got stalled right before he was set to be beatified. He's at the state of right now venerable, and then after beatification, he is blessed, and then at canonization, he becomes saint. So again, this comes down to, I think, pettiness and territoriality within the church. He was really just a few days away from being beatified because he'd already had a miracle. I don't know if you knew about this miracle, but a baby who was born, stillborn, and kind of shuttled off to the side after an hour or more, started crying. And the parents had been praying that entire hour for Fulton Sheen's intercession. And so the baby lived, and the doctor said, well, he was without oxygen for such a long time, he's going to be multiply handicapped. He's perfect.
Oh,
wow. Now he's a little boy. So he's just fine. So he's got that miracle. You have to have two to become a saint, unless you're a martyr, and he was not a martyr. But somebody in the Rochester diocese lodged a complaint against him that, I don't really know exactly what it is, but I have to guess it had something to do with the clergy sexual abuse. And that and I don't think he was called into question on that. I think the question was, had he done enough to do this or do that, or had he passed on some priest that he should have known was, doing bad things? So immediately the Sheen Foundation investigated this. The Vatican investigated it, and they could find no reason to pause the canonization cause any longer. However, we are now here a couple of years past that. I asked a couple of bishops about this. How do we get this done? And I thought, if I was rich, I would send every bishop in the country my book. They should read it, because he really deserves it. He's truly holy, and there's nothing that obstructs his holiness at all. So he really should be canonized. I suspect it will happen, maybe not in my lifetime, but probably yours. But what's happening is that other dioceses have saints, and they're being, causes that they're pushing, trying to get them across the finish line, if you will, to join the club, the very elite group. And so Sheen's not quite there yet, but he should be. And if there's justice in the church, and there should be, he will be a saint.
I'm sure
One
he
of these
will.
days.
I'm sure he will. Before I let you go, is there anything you'd like to say that you didn't get to say that you think is important? Besides, of course, everybody, make sure you buy this book. We're going to put a link in the show notes so you can click on it and order this book, because I think, and the other books too, we'll put links for all of those. But is there anything you didn't get to say that you would like to say now?
Well, one of the reasons the subtitle on my book is Convert Maker is that he is credited with 42,000, I'll say that again because it's really big, 42,000 converts.
Wow.
Now, I don't know how they arrived at that number. One of the converts that I talk about in the book was a radio convert. She'd never saw him in person before she converted. She converted because of what he was saying on the radio at the time. And they did get together much later and became really good friends. But she always credited Sheen as the one who converted her, even though the one who brought her into the church was a priest from a local parish.
Wow.
So I think that Sheen is, as we said right early on, he's timely. He's timelessness. He's as apt today as he was back then, maybe even more so, because I think in some ways the things that he talked about, he certainly talked about getting God out of the public square. And when you start doing that, the things that follow from that. So he was very, very much against relativity. He talked about that. He also talked about how communists would change the language. So you think about, in our political spheres today, people will take a word that's commonly used and then make it mean something else. So, and he would say that was a lie.
Right.
That was a lie. At any rate, he's a wonderful man. I think your audience, if they pick up the book, will learn to love him as you do,
Yes,
and as I do, and maybe we can all be there together when they canonize him.
that would be great.
It would. It really would.
Well,
absolutely.
Dr. Hughes, I really appreciate you coming. I appreciate your time. This has been just, I've really enjoyed our interview here, and I know that I want to read the book. I know my audience will want to order this book for sure, and I just appreciate you very much writing it. So thank you for all that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. It was my pleasure.
Good. All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming. Thank you. Love you. Bye. Thank you for joining me today. Now go out and be a bright light in someone's life. And remember, be focused, be faithful, and be fresh. Fresh Catholic is produced, edited, and recorded in Ventura, California.